overflowing with sinister black liquid. The bitter cusp, a cup of poison that the Jade Queen had once served her rapacious guests. Despite the fact that Sunny had started his awakened career as a poisoner, he did not use this memory often. The last time he had, it was to coat the arrows and bullets of the 1st Evacuation Army soldiers with the black venom. It helped them a lot during the mad dash to Falcon Scott. But who knew it would come in handy today? Sending all 5 of his shadows to wrap themselves around the bitter cusp, Sunny tilted it and watched as a stream of black liquid fell into the crimson water. The poison flowed and flowed. The mistress of the palace herself presented them with a cup of the sweetest nectar. No matter how much of the sweet nectar they drank, the cup remained full. The more of it they consumed, the more of it they desired. The words of the description of the sinister memory surfaced in his mind. Indeed, no matter how much of the glossy black liquid he poured into the lake, it continued to flow. There was no doubt that more of it had flowed out of the bitter cusp than the jade chalice was supposed to contain. There was no explanation for where the poison was coming from, not that he needed one. Endless Spring was always like that, as were many memories. Mundane logic almost never applied to how they functioned. Sunny did not need an explanation, though. All he needed was for the blood lake to drink as much of the poison as there was. After a while, it seemed as though the crimson waters had become restless. Subtle ripples spread over the lake's surface, and shallow waves licked its shore. Forcing himself to stay still, Sunny threw over the shoulder. Step back. Effie obediently waddled a few steps away from him and grew still. He did not move a centimeter, though, no matter how much he wanted to, and continued to pour the black poison into the water. As time went on, the blood lake started to look more and more eerie. Its crimson waters seemed to be tinted a subtly darker shade now, and rippled silently. Although there was no wind, the waves rolling across the surface of the lake were becoming more noticeable. Sunny took a deep breath. He knew that only about half an hour had passed, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, the stream of poison grew thinner, then thinner still. Then, it broke, and only a few stray drops of the black liquid fell down. The bitter cusp was empty. Well, that's done. Standing some distance away, Effie asked. Now that you've poisoned this lake so thoroughly, what are you going to do next? Sunny dismissed INNNN's mantle and gave her a dark look. After a few moments of silence, he said, "What do you think? Now, I'm going to go for a swim." Effie's eyes grew round. What? Swimming in an abominable lake wasn't enough, so you decided to add deadly poison to the soup first. He couldn't suppress a short laugh. Well, I am immune to most poisons. It's going to sting a bit, for sure, but with some luck, it will be all right. He sighed, then dismissed the bitter cusp and called the 5 shadows back. Evaluating how much essence he had left, Sunny then opened the gate of the shadow lantern and manifested the shadow spawn shell around his body. Summoning the mantle to cover it with a layer of onyx armor, he reinforced that armor with 5 layers of augmentation, and then gave Effie a wink. She seemed to pale a little at the sight. I'm off. There is some food in the coffer. I told it not to bite your hands off, so feel free to explore. With that, Sunny cursed inwardly, and dove into the hungry, man-eating lake. Chapter 1464 Sunny Submarine. Wrapped in the protective shell of shadows and the onyx carapace of the mantle, Sunny breathed with the help of the essence pearl and fell into the murky depths. He had swum away from the shore and then manipulated his weight to plunge down like a rock. The water pressing down on him was crimson and dark. It was also poisoned and teeming with myriads of invisible, gluttonous horrors. He didn't like it at all. The poison of the bitter cusp had spread far by now, and it should have killed numerous microscopic creatures that permeated the bloody water. The rest should have been weakened, as well. But was it enough to save him? Sunny was going to find out soon. I haven't received any fragments, either. What a scam. His shadow shell was like a diving suit, with no gaps or seams that could allow the terrifying tiny creatures to reach his flesh. The mantle covering the shell was like a layer of armor, reinforced 5 times over by his shadows. In a sense, Sunny was like a miniature submarine. His task, accordingly, was to explore the bottom of the lake without being crushed and swallowed by its depths. However, he could already feel myriads of tiny teeth, or whatever it was that the invisible horrors had instead of teeth, gnawing at his black carapace. The mantle was holding, at least 4 now, but the shell was sustaining damage. It was as if its outer surface was slowly dissolving and being washed away by the crimson water. That's pretty bad. Feeling the lake starting to devour and digest his shell, Sonny felt cold horror wash over him. However, he managed to maintain his composure. In fact, the situation was better than he had expected. Sure, his improvised diving suit was being devoured, but at a much slower rate than usual. The poison of the bitter cusp was doing its job. As long as the mantle held and the exposed surface of the shadow shell was limited, he could repair it faster than the lake was destroying it. Even if his onyx armor started to crack and disintegrate, he would be able to keep up with the relentless attrition for a while. Summoning more shadows from the lantern, Sonny went about mending the dissolving form of the shadow spawn. At the same time, his feet touched the bottom of the lake. Pushing himself through the water, he walked forward. Surrounded by the crimson gloom and an incalculable amount of abominable microscopic killers, he advanced deeper into the blood lake. Its bottom was strangely smooth and regular, hinting at its artificial origin. Well, the whole island was artificial, so Sonny should not have been surprised that this lake, too, had been created by a Lethia of the Nine instead of appearing naturally. He was starting to feel nervous. Windflower had described what he had to find and what he needed to do, but she did not know the precise location of their goal. So, Sonny had to search for it himself. Depending on his luck, the search could take a relatively small amount of time, or last very long. The former was fine, but the latter meant certain death. He did not have a lot of essence left to maintain the shadow shell, after all. Damn it. The deeper into the lake Sonny walked, the harder it became to advance. The rock surface under his feet was still smooth, angled down at a shallow angle, but there were more and more obstacles in his path. These obstacles were the remains of numerous nightmare creatures. Sonny had thought that the Bone Orchard was the only monster graveyard on the island, but he was wrong. It seemed that the Blood Lake was the place that Alethea had used to dispose of the carcasses of the most abominations she slew. He couldn't help but notice that the towering remains he had to either climb over or walk around had all belonged to nightmare creatures that were not made of flesh and bone. Instead, these had been abominations whose monstrous bodies had been composed of steel, stone, clay, glass, and all kinds of different materials. What a treasury! Sensing his shell starting to crumble faster and faster, vivid signs of corrosion appearing on the onyx plates of the mantle, Sonny tried to distract himself from fear by thinking how great it would have been to feed all these dead nightmare creatures to Fiend. Sadly, the gluttonous shadow had no chance of surviving the crimson depths of the Blood Lake. Even if his armor was in no way inferior to Sonny's mantle, Fiend was a living being. The invisible killers living in the red water would have instantly infiltrated his body and devoured it from the inside out. If these are the corpses that are too tough for the lake to digest, then just how many dead abominations have been erased by it entirely? Had this harrowing place been created by a Lethia of the Nine, to dispose of trash? The thought seemed darkly funny. More reason not to die here. The shadow spawn shell was falling apart. By now, the speed of its destruction was only barely slower than the speed with which Sonny was repairing it. The mantle was on the verge of crumbling, as well. When it did, the shell would start to dissolve much faster. In the end, Sonny would be devoured by the lake. Where the hell is it? Where is it? He forced his way through the crimson murk, trying not to panic. The bottom of the lake was almost flat now, showing that he was close to its center. That was the place where what he sought was most likely located. Sonny was almost ready to drown in despair when he finally saw it. In front of him, something rose above the rock surface of the lake's bottom. It was a large circle of dark steel, a dozen meters in diameter. There were no runes engraved into the ancient metal, and there was nothing laying on its surface. Finally, Sonny laboriously made his way to the steel circle hidden at the bottom of the lake and stopped near it. The metal ring was raised above the surface of the rock by about half a meter. It was hard to see any details in the crimson darkness, so Sonny simply felt its shape with shadow sense. He hesitated for a few moments, then summoned the Sin of Solace. There was a thin, almost invisible seam between the outer metal ring and the steel circle encompassed by it. Sonny cautiously inserted the jade geon into that seam and remained motionless for a second or two, gathering his courage. Then, he called the shadows back from the surface of the mantle and wrapped them around his body. Feeling his strength soar, Sonny ignored the net of cracks that immediately started to spread through his onyx armor, and pulled at the hilt of the Sin of Solace with all his might. He was trying to dislodge the steel circle from the metal ring it was resting in. Sonny used all his power, pulling and pulling. His shell was being swiftly devoured by the tiny horrors of the Blood Lake. The mantle was being corroded at a dire speed, ready to crack apart. The steel circle did not move. Arg! Sonny felt like his muscles were about to explode, but then, finally, he felt the ancient steel give. The heavy circle rose above the metal ring by a centimeter, then a few centimeters more. Without wasting any time, Sonny plunged the Sin of Solace deeper, changed its angle, and continued to pull. The lake was suddenly in mayhem all around him. And then, finally, the impossibly heavy steel lid rose above the metal ring. Letting go of his sword, Sonny grabbed its edge with all four of his hands, grunted, and raised the lid as high as he could while displacing a great amount of water. Standing on the metal ring, Sonny supported the lid with his shoulder and glanced down. Below him was nothing. Or rather, a long vertical shaft cut through the bedrock that led to nothing. He was looking at the abyss below the island. And all around him, the crimson water of the blood lake was already rushing into the hidden drain, falling into that abyss from a great height. The power of the current almost threw Sonny down, as well, but he somehow managed to hold on. As time passed, the pressure grew more and more terrible, as more and more water fell from the bottom of the island into unfathomable darkness like a red waterfall. Ah, hell! My shoulder hurts. Eventually, Sonny gritted his teeth and threw the lid of the drain sluice entirely open, then staggered back. By then, the water was only high enough to reach up to his shoulders. Some time later, it disappeared entirely, leaving him standing on wet rock. The blood lake was gone. Its crimson waters, and all the tiny horrors populating it, had been drained into the lightless abyss under the Leviathan Island. Standing at the bottom of a vast bowl cut into the stone soil of Alethia's island, Sonny sighed and looked up. Out there, far away, on the former shore of the lake, Effie was looking down at him with a strange expression. He remained motionless for a moment, then raised a hand and waved at her. Inside the shredded shadow shell, Sonny's face was pale. He had survived, somehow. Yeah. Let's not do anything like that again. Chapter 1465 Rendezvous, audiobook made by the Nut Lord. None of the text used in this audiobook belongs to me. Please support the original author online. This is a fan-made project and I make no money from it. Also join the Discord for a lot of more audiobooks too. Sonny remained motionless for a while, looking around. The bottom of the lake was dry now, revealing the towering remains of the ancient nightmare creatures. Well, relatively dry. Although most of the water had been drained into the dark abyss, large puddles of it still remained here and there. The remains of the abominations were still glistening with moisture, as well, which meant that countless invisible horrors were still crawling all over their surface. He was not going to feed fiend with these abandoned treasures any time soon. Damnation. Sonny's shell was still being eroded, as well. Luckily, the rate at which it was dissolving had decreased drastically. By now, he would be able to climb out of the empty lake and discard his ragged diving suit without being eaten alive. Looking up, he saw the mist slowly flowing down the slopes of the former lake. Very soon, it was going to shroud everything here, just like everywhere else on the island. Turning slightly, Sonny stared at the corpse of the giant winged creature and fought the temptation to try and fish the soul shards out of it. But no, there was no time, and the corpse still gave him a sense of danger. There had to be countless invisible creatures permeating it, after all. Even if the dead abomination was not the original source of the contamination, it was without a doubt being slowly devoured from the inside by it. Finally, Sonny glanced at the slope of the lakeshore. There, not obscured by the crimson water anymore, several dark openings were revealed, each a few meters in diameter. Those were the aqueducts that used to feed water into the moat of Alethia's tower. Now that the lake had been drained, the moat would soon run dry, as well, dealing the first blow to the system of enchantments maintaining the time loop. Which meant that Sonny's mission here was accomplished. He hesitated for a few moments, then threw one last glance at the darkness hiding beneath the island. Struggling against the sudden sense of vertigo, Sonny walked to where the lid of the sluice gate was laying on the wet stone, gathered his strength, and threw it back in place with a grunt. The massive steel circle fell back into the metal ring with a loud ringing sound, obscuring the lightless abyss. Immediately, Sonny felt a little calmer. I should hurry up. His essence was running dry, and there was still some time left until dusk. He dashed to the shore, mentally reviewing his performance. In retrospect, he could have saved himself some trouble by exploring the bottom of the lake as a shadow first, then returning to the shore, safely forming the shadow shell away from the deadly crimson water, and using Shadow Step to return to the gate. But he had not known if there were unknown dangers hiding in the lake. Provided the information he had possessed at the time, His strategy might not have been optimal, but it had been the safest. I succeeded, didn't I? Climbing onto the shore, Sunny dismissed the mantle, and then used Shadow Step to escape from inside the damaged Shadow Spawn shell. The towering figure of the four-armed fiend remained standing in the mist like a hollow statue. Appearing a safe distance away, near Effie, Sunny shivered and summoned his clothes back. Finally, he allowed the shadow shell to dissolve into nothingness. The huntress gave him a long look. "So, you just flushed the entire lake." Sunny smiled weakly. "I guess you can say that." Then, he looked at the sea of mist one last time and turned away. "In any case, our job here is done. Next, we need to rendezvous with Nephis, Cassie, and Jet." Climbing into Nightmare's saddle, he hid his expression and sighed quietly. Diving into the Blood Lake had been dangerous, but what Cassie had to do in the overgrown shrine was much more dangerous by far. "I hope they are all right." Alethia's island was strangely peaceful. Most of the Nightmare creatures had left their usual haunts, attracted by the havoc that the dead army had wreaked on the southern shore. Of course, the risen corpses had all been destroyed by now, and the dreadful abominations were on their way back north. Nevertheless, Sunny and Effie had a narrow window of time to slip to the rendezvous point without meeting any obstacles. Eventually, they reached the moor of the wide chasm that had given Sunny so much trouble in the past. Dismissing Nightmare and the covetous coffer, he led Effie to its edge, and helped her glide to the bottom with the help of the Dark Wing. Down there, the rock walls of the chasm were emanating searing heat, and the stench of burned chitin was almost unbearable. The charred corpses of the revolting millipedes crunched under their feet like autumn leaves and crumbled into ash. Despite the fact that Sunny was used to this scene, he still felt nauseated. Effie looked sickened, as well. Covering her nose, she asked, "What the hell happened here?" Sunny forced out a smile. "Nephis happened." The huntress stared at him for a moment, then coughed, understanding. The two of them made their way into the deeper part of the canyon, trying not to look around. Soon, they saw a dim light ahead. Sunny tensed when he recognized the soft radiance of the guiding light, but then let out a sigh of relief. 5 figures were there, in the shadow of a large rock outcropping. 1 was standing, 1 was sprawled on the ground, and 3 were sitting tiredly, their backs leaning against the rocks. Saint was the one standing. Her onyx armor seemed strangely brittle and dull, but there were not many cracks on it, as well as very little ruby dust smeared across its surface. Fiend was the one sprawled on the ground. The infernal flames burning in his eyes were much dimmer than usual, but there was no damage on his black-silver armor. In any case, he was alive. Nephis, Cassie, and Jet were in one piece, too. They seemed pale and strangely listless, but there were no terrible wounds on their bodies, nor was there much blood on their clothes. They had pulled through. Chapter 1466 Hidden Chamber. Sunny and Effie approached them quietly. "Hey! Long time no see." Effie's energetic voice echoed across the canyon, prompting a weak response from the 3 masters. Cassie flinched slightly, while Nephis and Jet turned to look at them with dim expressions. After a moment of silence, Soul Reaper forced out a smile. "Ah. It's you, Glutton. Yeah, it's good to see you too." The 3 were clearly shaken by their experience in the overgrown shrine. Sunny only knew that the creature that dwelled there was powerful and ancient. Even Windflower did not know much about it, except for the fact that it did not possess a physical body. Therefore, Jet's glaive and Neph's purifying flames were their best bet to destroy it. With Cass's supernatural intuition and affinity to revelations, as well as Saint's dark blade, they stood a good chance of, if not prevailing against the shrine horror, then at least getting the enchantment key and escaping alive. Walking over to the 3 masters, Sunny studied their conditions for a few moments, then turned to Cassie. "Did you get it?" She nodded slowly and raised a hand. On it lay a strange gemstone engraved with countless runes. Unlike the soul crystal of the guiding light, this gemstone seemed to absorb light, not produce it. "The enchantment key." Sunny let out a long sigh. "Good." Then, fascinated, he asked in a curious tone, "What was the creature inside the shrine like?" Cassie shivered slightly and lowered her head. "I don't really want to talk about that thing right now." Judging by the heavy expressions of Neph's and Jet's faces, they felt the same. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Just how bad was it? Nephis was so out of it that she had not even reacted to Effie's protruding belly. Nevertheless, he did not press the topic. The 3 of them had experienced all kinds of terrible things and faced all sorts of harrowing creatures. If they were that shaken by what had happened in the overgrown shrine, it must have been pretty bad. If so, he should be satisfied by the fact that they had made it out alive. Cassie's 2 echoes were nowhere to be seen, though. Hopefully, they were just damaged and not destroyed. All right, then. Let's go, we should hurry. They lingered for a while, then rose silently. Soon, the cohort traversed the deep chasm and entered the caverns. The terror that had created them was already dead. Cassie's group had slayed it on the way to the shrine. Sonny navigated the system of caves, following his memory. After a long time, they stopped near the wall of a cave that did not seem different from all the other ones they had passed. However, this one was special. Sonny remained motionless for a few moments, then looked up with apprehension. Eventually, he took a step to the side and sent his shadows to augment Saint. If you will. The graceful knight spared him an indifferent gaze, then walked forward and delivered a devastating blow to the wall of the cave. A net of cracks spread from the point where her gauntlet had struck the weathered rock. Saint did not stop there, though. Without wasting any time, she bombarded the wall of the cave with crushing blows, each sending a thunderous boom traveling through the caverns. Sonny covered his ears and winced. By his side, the other members of the cohort did the same. Only Fiend just stood there and stared, dim flames burning in his eyes. Eventually, the wall collapsed, revealing an empty space beyond. White mist streamed into the cave through the opening, as well as a few thin streams of water. Sonny gently pulled Nephis away from them. Follow me. The open space beyond the broken cave wall was the chasm of the tower's moat. Now that the water was gone, it was empty. The deadly field of twisted time had disappeared, as well. In other words, they did not have to cross the enchanted bridge anymore. Instead, they could cross the moat wherever they wished. There was also no need to traverse the central area of the island, which teemed with harrowing nightmare creatures by now. Instead of risking their lives in the misty forest, the cohort had come to the black cliff from below. They exited the caverns through the breach made by Saint, descended to the bottom of the moat, and made their way to its other side. Then, they scaled its vertical wall and climbed out of the chasm near the stone steps leading to the gate of the tower. The wide bridge was now behind them, the terrifying abominations frozen on it still standing motionless. The runes carved into the sides of the cliff were still intact. The cohort ascended the stone steps without looking back. Sonny opened the gate of Alethia's tower and let everyone inside, then closed it behind them. Turning around, he saw that Nephis, Jet, and Effie had frozen, looking at the corpse of the great tyrant with complicated expressions. He could understand how they felt. He had been quite the same the first time he saw the dreadful corpse, after all. Sonny sighed. It's dead. Don't worry. He told them not to worry, but was feeling agitated himself. Sonny was almost surprised that they had made it so far. The bone orchard, the caverns, the blood lake, the overgrown shrine, all of these steps could have ended in their deaths. And yet, somehow, the plan he and Cassie had concocted went without a hitch. All the deaths they had experienced on this nightmarish island had not been for nothing, it seemed. Now, all that was left was to gain access to the secret chamber of the tower. And destroy the loop. Glancing at Cassie, he nodded and walked to the center of the hall. She followed, holding the enchantment key in her small fist. When the two of them found themselves directly below the corpse of the great tyrant hanging from the ceiling, there was a strange sound, and the stones beneath their feet suddenly moved. That had never happened before, because they had never had the runic gemstone with them. As the other members of the cohort approached, the floor of the tower rearranged itself, revealing a narrow staircase. Without saying anything, they descended into the basement of Alethia's tower. There, a small spherical chamber was carved into the rock. Its walls were covered with sheets of polished metal, its surface etched with countless runes. At the center of the chamber, Sonny's eyes widened a little. A large, jagged piece of black rock was hovering in the air, radiating a sense of cold. It did not look special in any way, except for the fact that it was very similar to the estuary key. In fact, he would not be surprised if his little chunk of black stone and this larger one had come from the same source. What the hell? While Sonny was standing still, his thoughts in turmoil, Cassie silently approached the hovering boulder and walked around it. Eventually, she stooped, noticing a socket on the weathered black surface. The socket perfectly fit the size of the runic gemstone she was holding in her hand. The blind girl lingered, then turned to face them. I am going to insert the key now. The members of the cohort nodded solemnly. Cassie hesitated for a bit more, then gently pushed the gemstone into the socket. Nothing happened for a few moments. Then, the levitating piece of black rock trembled slightly, and fell to the floor of the chamber. It collided with the metal sheet and rolled a few times, raising a loud clangor. When the echoes of the collision subsided, the cohort was left in dead silence. Sonny took a deep breath. He could feel it, something had just changed about Alethia's island. A vague feeling that had been pressing down on his mind for so long that he had grown used to it was gone. They actually did it. They broke the cycle of twisted time that had reigned this place for centuries. The loop was gone. Chapter 1467. Just like that. The members of the cohort remained silent for a few long moments, staring at the chunk of black rock with complicated expressions. Perhaps for most of them, what had just happened in the small spherical chamber did not hold a lot of meaning, but for Sonny and Cassie, it did. Especially for him. Letting out a shaky breath, Sonny suddenly felt like his legs were about to give out. Taking a step back, he swayed slightly and lowered himself to the first step of the narrow stairs. His eyes were still glued to the fallen black stone, but his gaze had become distant. Cassie leaned on the guiding light, her face motionless. Nephis, Jet, and Effie watched them silently. After a while, the huntress finally spoke. "So, it's done? Just like that?" Sonny looked up at her, struggling to answer. Just like that? She made it sound as if it had been easy. Well, of course, she had just learned about the existence of the loop this morning, and it was gone before dusk. For him, however, the memories of the countless harrowing deaths he had experienced and witnessed on Alethia's island flooded Sonny's mind. That first time being cruelly executed by undying slaughter, the hopeless despair of watching devouring beast's giant hand descend from the mist, and so much more. All of it was behind him now, but not gone. Sonny wished he could have forgotten all this torment, like he had forgotten most of the nightmares about the Kingdom of Hope. But he couldn't. These memories were going to haunt him forever. They can stand in line and wait their turn. There was a vast museum of heartbreak and horror in his memory, already. What could a few more nightmares do? He sighed, then nodded. Yes, the loop is destroyed. I can feel it. Effie lingered for a moment. Ah, good, then. What's the plan now? Just as she said these words, Sonny felt something move in his soul, and a flood of essence poured into his cores. Somewhere outside the island, the seven suns were plunging into the great river. It was dusk. He relaxed a little. The loop was destroyed, which was a great relief. However, it also meant that the future was once again unknown and unpredictable. Sonny felt much calmer now that his reserves of essence were swiftly replenishing. Cassie kept quiet, so he answered Effie's question himself. It's like I told you before. We will hide in this tower and wait out the immediate aftermath of our actions. In the next few days, Alethia's island is going to be a battlefield. Undying slaughter and devouring beast are going to go on a rampage. He paused for a moment, then shook his head. Or rather, their rampage will continue, uninterrupted. They will either eradicate most of the nightmare creatures on the island, or be eradicated by them. In any case, we must ensure that these defiled versions of you and Jet never return to the Great River. Sonny had fought both the Mist Wraith and the bestial giantess many times. He died when he fought alone. He watched his companions die before being killed himself when fighting side by side with his allies. The plagues were simply too dreadful to be defeated by them. But that was inside the loop. Now that the loop was broken, the flaws of the defiled saints could finally be exploited. Devouring beasts' hunger and undying slaughter's need to kill would become their undoing. In theory. In practice, it was not going to be easy to exploit these flaws. Devouring beast, especially, was going to have plenty of things to eat. Undying slaughter was going to have plenty of things to kill, as well, but she could potentially expend a lot of essence in the process. But this was a problem for another day. For now, Sonny wanted to rest. When was the last time he slept? He couldn't even remember, which was not a good sign. A tired mind makes mistakes. He had no doubt he had made many mistakes already. Luckily, none of them had been serious enough to doom them for now. Cassie had to be just as exhausted. All in all, the two of them had done remarkably well, considering the situation. Sonny took a deep breath, then stood up and looked around the spherical chamber one last time. For now, let's return to the first floor of the tower. We'll be spending the next few days, maybe even weeks there. We should clean it up, if nothing else. They made their way above ground, where blood, rubble, and ghastly remains of the great tyrant's minions littered the floor. The tyrant itself was still hanging from the broken ceiling, the terrible wounds dealt to it by the Serpent King in the distant past still as fresh as if they had been delivered a few hours ago. Effie stared at the terrible corpse with apprehension. What is that thing, though? Sunny glanced at her, then forced out a smile. What else? That's your food for the foreseeable future. The huntress visibly paled. Huh? Wait, you're not serious, are you? He shrugged helplessly. Why wouldn't I be serious? Weren't you jealous that Nephis and I feasted on the meat of a great monster? Well, here's an actual great tyrant. No need to thank me. Effie was so stunned that she actually stammered. But, wait, when was I ever jealous? Jet patted her on the shoulder and grinned. Bon appetit. With that, the five of them went about cleaning the first floor of Alethia's tower. Sunny positioned several of his shadows to keep watch, knowing that this place was not as safe as it had been before. It was still impossible to cross the bridge, but the twisted currents of time that had been protecting the moat were gone now. In theory, any nightmare creature could reach the tower with some effort. Getting inside was an entirely different matter, but it was better to be safe than sorry. They cleared the rubble, incinerated the remains of the tyrant's minions, and washed the blood off the stone floor. The interior of Alethia's tower had not become cozy or comforting after that, but it was already better than many places the members of the cohort had camped at in the past. Jet and Effie, who had not spent a night on solid ground since entering the nightmare, were especially appreciative of this stone shelter. For once, things were looking up for the cohort. Chapter 1468 An extravagant meal. It was already deep into the night by the time the hall was clean enough for them to make camp in one of its less damaged corners. Everyone was bone-tired and ready to topple over. Sunny and Cassie had been suffering in the loop for a long time, while for Effie and Jet, this terrible day had come straight after surviving the evisceration of their tribe and being chased by the drowned for an entire week. Nephis, meanwhile, was mentally and physically drained because of how much she had used her aspect today. Sunny left his companions in the corner of the hall designated as their camp and walked over to the corpse of the great tyrant. While they were making a fire, he manifested a raised platform from the shadows and went about extracting the 5 supreme soul shards from the horrid corpse. Luck was on his side. King Daeron had neglected to collect them after slaying the creature. Perhaps he had been in a hurry to leave Alethia's island, or perhaps such things had no value for the mighty sovereign. In any case, it was Sunny's win. Soon, he returned to his companions carrying 5 radiant crystals and a generous chunk of monster meat. It was the meat of a great abomination, as well. Despite the divine taste, chewing it was not going to be easy for Cassie and Jet. Nephis, Effie, and himself would have to augment themselves with their aspects to enjoy the meal, as well. While Nephis went about preparing the extravagant meal, Sunny wiped the soul shards clean, summoned the covetous coffer, and stored them inside. At that time, Jet gave him a long look. There's enough meat to feed Effie for a long time. He nodded. Soul Reaper lingered for a few moments, then asked, "What about me? How am I going to last longer than Undying Slaughter here, inside the tower?" Sunny frowned. This was indeed an issue. Both Jet and Undying Slaughter could only exist for as long as there was essence in their fractured soul cores. Neither could generate essence naturally, and would only replenish it by killing living beings. The Mist Wraith had many more creatures to kill out there, in the dreadful reaches of Alethia's island. Of course, she would also have to burn some essence to prevail against them. Still, Jet was at a disadvantage while locked inside the tower. He had a solution, though. Hopefully, he did. Lowering his hand into the open maw of the covetous coffer, Sunny took out a beautiful golden fruit. The fruit looked clean, ripe, and delicious, tantalizing, really. Its refreshing fragrance made him want to sink his teeth into the soft, succulent flesh of the fruit right that instant. The fruit, of course, had come from the sacred tree growing on the deck of the chain breaker. In fact, Sunny had plucked all the fruits from its branches before leaving the ship in the morning. Suppressing the gnawing desire to devour the golden fruit, Sunny threw it to Jet. "Try it." She caught the fruit and looked at it in confusion. Then, she shrugged and took a generous bite. The rest of them watched Jet consume the fruit of the sacred tree with envy. By the time it was gone, a stunned expression appeared on her face. I just received an infusion of essence. A lot of it." Sunny nodded in satisfaction. "Thank the gods. It works." He had tried eating the golden fruits during one of the revolutions. Sunny was understandably afraid of them, considering what had happened to him on the Ashen Barrow. By now, it was clear that the soul-devouring tree was somehow connected to the sacred tree that grew on the chain breaker, and had come from Heart God's desecrated grove. And perhaps to the strange tree to which Eurus of the Nine had been nailed in punishment. However, there was a big difference between the Soul Devourer and Chain Breaker's mystical tree, apart from the fact that the former was thousands of years old and a nightmare creature. It was that the Soul Devourer fed on living beings, while their tree didn't. As a result, while the fruits of the Soul Devourer could grant awakened soul fragments, the fruits of the young sacred tree couldn't. Instead, they were brimming with soul essence. Sunny had used them a few times to help Nephis recover from essence exhaustion faster, but in the grand scheme of things, it was of not much use. Especially because they had no visible effect on him, due to the fact that his soul required shadow essence instead of soul essence. It was also why Sunny was not sure that the golden fruits would have any effect on Jet, considering how unique her soul was, even when compared to his. Luckily, everything seemed to work fine. Otherwise, he would have had to take Jet outside the tower to hunt in the next few days, risking both their lives. Sunny let out a sigh of relief. There were a good dozen fruits inside the coffer, some of them riper than the others. They would last Jet a good deal of time. A pale smile appeared on his face. Good. That's good. I have a bunch of these with me, so don't worry about getting enough essence for now. Jet threw a long look at the covetous coffer, then nodded. Soon, their late supper was ready. Effie and the rest of them consumed the sublime meat of the great tyrant as they struggled to stay awake. Then, just before dawn, they finally allowed themselves to succumb to exhaustion and went to sleep on the cold stone floor. Everyone except for Sunny, that was. He lingered for a while, sitting silently on a piece of rubble. His gaze was hollow and grim. Soon, Sunny felt the enchantment of the crown of twilight come to life once again, replenishing his essence once more. It was dawn. Which meant that now, there was absolutely no doubt that the loop had indeed been destroyed. He had already known it, of course, but still waited for the former termination point to arrive, just to be sure. The dawn came and went, but Sunny was still sitting on the piece of rubble inside Alethia's tower. He was not sent back to the deck of the chain breaker. Motionless as a statue, Sunny let out a long sigh. Then, he slowly looked up. There, far above. So fast. Corruption was spreading so fast, tiny speck before, but now, it was already like a pearl. If Sunny did not act soon, the darkness would spread and consume Windflower's soul entirely. There was no time to waste. And yet, he could not simply kill her. And talking to the beautiful saint one last time. Dissolving into the shadows, he allowed Nightmare to bring him to her dream. Soon, Sunny found himself standing on a tall cliff overlooking the vast expanse of the great river. The seven suns were slowly rising from the flowing water. The tranquil expanse of Alethia's island was shrouded in the dim twilight of the early dawn. Windflower was standing at the edge of the cliff with her back to him, gazing at the water. A cool breeze was playing with her wavy hair, and her azure robe looked like the midnight sky in the dimness of dawn. Sensing his approach, she shifted slightly and let out a quiet sigh. So, you have succeeded. Sunny froze for a moment, then nodded. Yes. The loop is gone. We destroyed it. She turned around and looked at him. Then, a soft smile illuminated her enchanting face. How marvelous. And on your first try, no less. He walked over to stand beside her on the edge of the cliff. Looking at the dreamlike expanse of the great river, Sunny said darkly. First try? It might have been, but I spent an eternity preparing for it. Months of torment, countless deaths, all for this single moment. I wouldn't call it marvelous. Windflower studied his face silently, then looked away and sighed. Countless deaths, huh? Dying once does not sound so terrible, in comparison. She paused before asking. You haven't forgotten what you swore to do, have you? Sonny gritted his teeth. I remember. The beautiful saint fell quiet. A few moments passed before she spoke again, her voice losing some of its usual lightness. After it's done, burn my body. I don't want anything to sprout from my corpse and walk around wearing my skin. Find a strong flame to burn it. Sonny had no response, so he simply nodded. Windflower took a deep breath, then took a step back from the edge and laughed. Don't be so serious, Sunless. I lived a long life, far too long, really. Gods, I am older than my grandmother was when she passed away, by a few centuries, at least. Ah, these old bones of mine have had enough. Shaking her head, she walked to the edge of the forest and put her hand on the trunk of an ancient pine. Are you going to visit Twilight before sailing for Verge? Following her into the forest, Sonny nodded again. We are planning to, yes. The last 2 members of my cohort are there. We hope to find something else to help us in Twilight, as well. Windflower lingered for a few moments. Good. That crown you wear will be of help if the city still stands. It is another enchantment key, in a sense. The defensive array that was meant to protect the city will recognize